Howdy folks, and you're listening to the Speak Up podcast, your number one topical discussion podcast surrounding all things mental health. And I'm your host Ashley, and in today's episode, episode 7, I'll be talking to Natalie Fields, who is from the USA. She's a project manager, works in the IT sector, and I'll be talking to her today in this interview about bipolar disorder. Now Natalie has a diagnosis of bipolar type 2 and also ADHD, so she'll be talking to us a little bit about that, but also her personal sort of lived experiences of having the long arduous journey of getting the diagnosis, but also the long journey of finding the right medication to manage the bipolar, which she says that she was diagnosed with from a younger age, and also her personal experience of having been hospitalised for her mental health. She shares with us some words of wisdom for listeners who might be following through on a similar pathway in their life, but also she talks about the common misconceptions of her conditions, and she kind of wants to challenge those kind of stigmas and misconceptions amongst sort of the general public, and how it kind of misappropriates her illnesses that she has. Really enjoyed recording this episode. This was episode 7 with Natalie. I hope you guys enjoy it as much as I've enjoyed recording it. Please like, share, comment and subscribe across all our channels, and as always guys, quick disclaimer, we're not a medical podcast, so it's not intended to be a substitute for your mental health and mental health advice from your GP, guys. So without further ado, we'll jump straight into the interview. Thanks again for listening, folks. Howdy folks, and you're listening to the Speak Up podcast, your number one topical discussion podcast surrounding all things mental health. I'm your host Ashley, and today it's episode 7. Recording episode 7 there. It's been a long journey. Didn't expect it to get this far, but yeah, episode 7, guys. And today we've got Natalie Fields on the podcast, who's going to be talking to us about her mental health experiences and conditions and whatnot. So I've got Natalie on the line now.
Yeah.
How are you doing, Natalie?
I'm good. How are you today, Ashley?
Yeah, very well, thanks. Very, very well. So we'll sort of jump into it really,
Okay.
into the questions, and we'll just sort of take the natural flow of things.
All right.
So can you tell me, or just briefly, about yourself and why you decided to come on the podcast today?
Yeah, so I'm 39. I live in the Dallas-Fort Worth area, Texas, USA. I have ADHD. I also have bipolar disorder type 2. I was diagnosed with ADHD after the age of 30, like I was 30 or 31. Bipolar, I was diagnosed when I was 18, but I didn't go through like an actual battery of tests back then, and I didn't know there was like type 1, type 2. So it's been a journey to learn about these disorders and, the coping mechanisms and find the right combination of treatment and medication, all that good stuff. And for me, the reason I wanted to come on here and speak up, is because I think it's really important to be a positive voice out there in terms of ending the stigma regarding mental health. And a lot of people may feel alone in their journey, whether it's bipolar, ADHD, both, like me. The struggle of figuring out or finding like a therapist, psychiatrist, psychologist, all that good stuff, the trial and error of medication, if that's applicable to you, and then the combination of all of those. And then also there are people out there who kind of frown upon or make jokes about various mental health disorders and the people with them. And, like they use certain things as like an insult. They misconstrue a lot of things. There are a lot of bad actors out there. And then there are people who are like medication shamers or pill shamers, and they think that, you know, getting a little sunshine and a little exercise is going to fix everything. Sure, those things are great, but if you're super depressed, you can't even get yourself to do those things. And they're not going to outbalance just plain old bad brain chemicals, chemical imbalances. So, I just want people to know, like, you're not alone, and you're going to be okay. And I'm here for you, and hey, I'm dealing too. We can do this.
Yeah, that's amazing. I mean, yeah, I've been through the whole rigmarole of finding a psychiatrist and a therapist
Mm,
over here in the UK. I don't know if you know, but we've got the National Health Service, and it's in an
mhm.
absolute disarray at the minute. We've got a system that's completely broken,
Mm,
and it's taxpayer funded. But obviously, the problems with that is that it's under resourced because the government doesn't want to put the money into the
mm,
system, and so that leaves the patient waiting lists, struggling to get the help. And it's been a real fight on my hands to get a psychiatrist and help and things. So I completely understand that. It's a long journey to diagnosis, isn't it? So
yeah, yeah.
it really is. Um, with that being said, how did this all sort of start for you then?
So when I was 18, I had a breakdown and I made an attempt on my own life. I ended up in an inpatient facility for about 2 weeks. And during that time, that's when I was initially diagnosed bipolar. Like I said, I didn't go through like an actual battery of tests. It was more, I guess, observation based, a few questions, and that was it. But I didn't know that there was type 1 and type 2 and that I was type 2. Uh, they did put me on some medication, but it was kind of like it made me groggy all the time and didn't feel great. And then once I left that facility, I didn't have any follow through, like any follow up care. And so I didn't have medication after that. So it's like I had medication for 2 weeks, and, you know, good thing that I came out of the breakdown during that period, because who knows what would have happened had I not. And so, okay, so from there on, I knew that I had bipolar. I didn't really understand the full ramifications of what it meant. I had no coping mechanisms, no, management methods. I just kind of managed like the best that I could through life. And so from there until I was like 30, 31 or so, I had periods of like medicated versus not. I had sought help when I was in college through the free clinic on campus. After Hurricane Katrina, there was like a grant where you could get a handful of um, visits, and they could prescribe medication. So, I had some for a little while there, and that was kind of it. And so finally, when I got that, I guess you would call it like a real diagnosis, like I don't know, would you call it like comprehensive diagnosis? I guess when I got that in my 30s, it was like an epiphany, especially the ADHD side.
Yeah,
So ever since then, I've just been like, I've it's like I've found this whole other world of what exists out there, and I've learned so much, and it just feels so validating to have those diagnoses and to start to understand them and to realize it's not that necessarily something is wrong with me. There's nothing morally wrong with my disorganization or my time blindness, for example. These are traits that I have to deal with because of these chemical imbalances. And then
yeah.
here are some management methods that you can learn from, I don't know, TikTok or from your doctor, whatever. So yeah, it's been, like we've said, it's been an interesting journey.
Yeah, yeah. And as well, I can sort you mentioned medication there a few times and things, and I imagine you've been through a lot of different types of medication as well for the
Oh yeah.
bipolar.
Oh yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Um, as well, you mentioned as well about you mentioned TikTok as well. Funnily enough, that's come up before in prior episodes. We're talking about people that take TikTok as gospel, and especially for mental health and things like that. And yeah, it's well, say it humorously, but obviously there's no humor involved when it's real people. So
Yeah.
it's dangerous, really, isn't it? Social media
Yeah.
for mental health and stuff when it's
Yeah.
not from
It can
reputable
be like
sources.
a double-edged sword. Like you can find really good information out there, but you can also find unhelpful, like you said, also even dangerous information. So it can be hard to discern.
Yeah,
So that's where it's good to have, if you have access to mental health assistance from credentialed experts, like
yeah,
an
yeah,
actual doctor, actual therapist.
yeah,
You can run some things by them and they can kind of help validate. But
yeah.
yeah, I get what you're saying.
Of course, yeah, and I completely agree on your. You made a point in the first question actually, and I've sort of I didn't really address it, but I completely agree with you when you say about getting it from the right sources and the right
Mhm.
people with the right credentials as well, because like you say, there's a lot of well-intentioned people that might say, well, okay, get some exercise, have some sunshine, take some vitamins, you'll be okay.
Mhm.
But like you say, that doesn't always solve the more severe, the severe cases. It might remedy sort of mild depression and anxiety, but on
Mhm.
the sort of severe end, it's a bit more nuanced than that, isn't it? There's more
Yeah.
variables involved. Um, so yeah, I completely take your point there, and I completely agree. Just to put that out there for listeners and things. Um, so um, the next one is about treatment, really. So just as an aside, obviously, if I ask you any questions that you've already answered, let me know,
Yeah.
and then we'll sort of go past those. But for you personally, what do you feel was the way forward in terms of treatment? Was it a combination of therapy and medication, or?
Yeah. So for me, um, I've definitely determined that the exercise and the sunshine are not going to totally do it. I do need that medication, that assistance there. Now it was a process. It's been quite a process, like you've said. You were sure I've tried various things for the bipolar disorder, medication wise. And there is a lot of trial and error, especially if you have multiple disorders like I do. Some of them can, you know, counteract with each other. I mean, there's just no telling, and I'm not the medical professional, so you kind of have to depend on them to make the right decisions for you with your input. You regularly go and they ask you so how are you feeling? Are you feeling sluggish? Are you feeling more energetic? Are you sleeping okay? Things like that. And so, yeah, there's a lot of trial and error until, finally, I've I finally landed on the right cocktail of medication for both
Yeah,
the bipolar disorder and the ADHD. And then I have my therapist that I regularly see faithfully, religiously. And, the chemical part of it, the medication part of it, it helps a lot. Like, it helps so
mm,
much, but it's so good to have that, what I call a disinterested party, to listen to you vent, to hear what's going on in your day, to help you unpack some of those things, offer assistance and guidance on how to kind of reverse some of the negative habits or thought processes that you have that cause some of the habits, or prevent you from effectively managing your various symptoms or traits. And when I say disinterested party, it's great to have a parent or a good friend that you can chat with. And I won't discount that. But those folks have what I call a little skin in the game. They just want to make you feel better. And so sometimes they, you know, they they have a different perspective from what a therapist will have. They also don't have the credentials. And so they may not effectively help you unpack what you need to unpack.
yeah,
But also, there may be things that you're having issues with that you're not necessarily comfortable with being totally raw with them about. Whereas a
yeah,
therapist, you can just lay it all out, and there's no judgment. It's a totally safe space and you get accurate guidance, you
yeah,
know.
yeah,
So yeah, definitely. Definitely for me, it is a combination of all of the above.
yeah. Yeah, I mean, and I can relate to that as well. I mean, I see a psychotherapist, and we have sort of like talking therapy and stuff like that, and talk
Mm-hmm.
things through independently of the psychiatrist under the
Mm-hmm.
community mental health team. So I can completely relate to that. It's it's good to have someone to talk to independent of your
Mm-hmm.
social circle and things like that, because like you say, your family and your friends, they're gonna not in all cases, but they're gonna try and be polite, aren't they? Even though they don't really
Mm-hmm.
know, in some cases they might be ignorant, they might not know much about your condition or your situation. They're gonna, be as polite as they can, aren't they?
Mm-hmm.
Even if it is sort of not good for you,
Right.
they don't know that, they're
Right.
sort of misinformed. I can relate to that completely. Um, so in terms of um, the treatment now, is that that's the treatment that you're receiving at the minute? Is that ongoing or?
Yeah, that's ongoing. And I also wanted to say I am a huge proponent for therapy,
Mm,
regardless if you have a diagnosis of any kind or not.
yeah,
Um, I think everyone can benefit from that experience. I don't really think there's a single person in the world who doesn't have some sort of unhealthy ideas or habits or, going through something at some point they need a little help with. So,
yeah,
yeah, I just wanted to throw that out there.
yeah. You don't necessarily need the diagnostic pathway to access
Right.
therapy. Sometimes it can
Right.
just be a better lifestyle sort of choice,
Mhm.
or more positive
Yeah.
spin on things. Um, so, what would your words of advice be to people that might be in your position, that might feel they need that sort of support and stuff? If they were sort of like at the beginning of that process, what would your advice be? Obviously, bear
Yeah.
in mind that we're not professionals here, so we're not. I'm just putting a disclaimer out there
Right.
that yeah, we're not professionals, and please don't take the advice as like gospel truth, as like professional advice.
Right.
Always go to your doctor, basically. But yeah, that's my question to you is what would your advice be?
Yeah, so of course, like we're not credentialed experts, but so first I would say if you have suspicions about whether you may have a disorder but you don't have a diagnosis, or if you're just kind of questioning things, and you have access to getting tested cuz like kind of like you mentioned earlier, the NHS is having some issues. If you've got many like USA listeners, oh, Betty, that's a whole other rabbit hole as far as like accessible care. But back to my point, if you have access to getting diagnosis, to getting tested, and you have any suspicions, any wonders, just like do it. It's so worth it. Um, at the very least, it can make you feel validated if you do find out there's something going on because you're like, just like me, oh, when I was diagnosed with ADHD, it made me feel so much better about things that I had seen as wrong with me or effed up. Like, oh,
Yeah,
there's actually a reason why I do this thing. Like, my brain actually is causing this. It's not just because, like, I'm a piece of garbage, you know?
hmm.
Because that's kinda how I had always thought, like, "Well, I'm just garbage. I don't know why I can't be on time to things, um, or why I'm just so messy." And then the other part of that is, I would say, F the haters. Do what you need to do for you to manage your mental health. It's yours and it's nobody else's. If you need medication, if you need therapy, any of that. And it's accessible for you to get that diagnosis, that prescription, that help. Please do. You will thank yourself. And
Yeah,
and your friends and family might even thank you depending on what your outward traits might be. you know?
yeah. I mean, yeah. So it's sort of like take ownership and steer that ship and
Yeah.
brave those stormy waters, or whatever, however you want to put it with that analogy. But yeah, that's great.
Yeah.
So what? The next question is more about sort of like the common misconceptions of
Mhm.
of of your sort of conditions. I was thinking more in terms of bipolar when I was sort of phrasing this question, but
Mm.
what are some of the misconceptions of your conditions that you have that you'd like to correct, or some of the myths that you'd like to sort of challenge and speak up about?
Yeah, so ADHD, I'll kind of touch on that first. People have this idea, this concept of ADHD in their head that oh, it's like this little kid that's just running around all nuts, and like won't sit down and can't pay attention. Well, that kid might have ADHD, sure. But it's not always just hyperactivity. It's, not always somebody just running around like they're on uppers. It can affect you the opposite way as well. So, it can affect your levels of attentiveness, your focus, your activity. And those things can be either way lessened or way heightened. The problem is that we are typically one end of that spectrum or the other. So, rather than what's considered a normal or happy medium. And there are a lot of other markers of ADHD as well, but I just kind of picked those three. I think they're more common, and that it's not just little boys.
Yeah,
Little girls oftentimes don't get diagnosed, which is just nuts, but it's because we present differently typically.
yeah,
Because I think most people, like teachers and guidance counselors and, folks like that, are looking for or paying attention to the little kid that's running around all super hyper and can't sit still and pay attention.
yeah,
So yeah. Um, and then in terms of bipolar disorder, it doesn't just mean that you're swinging moods around, you know, back and forth like a pendulum all the time, all day, every day. Some people take days, weeks, months, even years to get into a mood cycle, and their mood cycles can be very long. There are people who, do swing between moods in the same day, but that's not all of us. That's kind of the difference between types 1 and 2. So type 2, like me, are the folks who have those longer periods. So yeah, so it's very different.
yeah.
And also, I want people to stop using bipolar as an insult. I hear people say like, "Oh, this weather is so bipolar." Shut up. Like,
Yeah,
that's not a thing. The weather does not have a mental disorder. Stop it.
that's
Um
offensive, isn't it? That's so offensive.
It's
Like, you
oh,
know.
like, yeah, I hate it. And I know people don't they don't even think about it. It's not something that they're meaning to insult people with bipolar disorder. I get that. But, it doesn't help some of the
Mm,
stigma that's already out there. And then someone who is indecisive and changes their mind frequently, that's not bipolar either. Oh, that girl, she's so bipolar, she can't make up her mind. That's not even like making up your mind is not the same as mood cycling anyway. So, like, again, stop using it as an insult. That's very offensive and it's hurtful because you never know who in your life may be listening and who
mm,
may have a diagnosis that you're not aware of. But now they know that if you think of things that way, maybe you're not a safe person to talk to about those things.
yeah, massively. Yeah, it's
Yeah.
um, yeah. I mean, that's just like totally out of order, really. And I'm trying to think of other examples that I've heard in terms of mental health. But there
Mhm.
is people out there that use terms loosely.
Mhm. Mhm.
Sometimes intentional, sometimes not. But
Mhm.
this is obviously one of the reasons why podcasts like this are so useful, because they're kind of informing people that
Mhm.
these things aren't really acceptable, in society. But um, in terms of the bipolar, you said as well, like, because the gaps between um, the the moods going up and the moods going down and the mood stabilizing, um, you said it could take like a long time between each mood. I mean,
Mhm.
I guess that's as well why, like, it takes so long to get a diagnosis in some cases,
Mm.
because the the psychiatrist is only seeing you in one consistent mood, and then he might see you when you're kind of depressed or at your baseline, and then it's up down, isn't it?
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, that's really interesting. That um, and with, I mean, this is probably just a question I've thrown in here, but just in terms of bipolar, because I'm interested in it in general. An intricate sort of condition in terms of the um, the details of it and stuff like that. I'm not
Mm-hmm.
really that well rehearsed with it myself, but
Mm-hmm.
just wanted to ask you some questions. Like with type
Yeah.
two, is that the one without the psychosis, or can you have psychosis with type two?
That's a good question.
Yeah,
I'm not entirely sure. Now, I do know that one of the minor differences is that we can swing between like bipolar depression and hypomania
yeah,
rather than mania, which hypomania is just like on a smaller scale.
yeah.
Whereas, when you're manic, you can make seriously major life changing decisions. Like I've heard of people gambling to the point that they lost their house when manic. I mean,
Wow.
just gargantuan decisions, very impulsive at times. And hypomania typically is just on a smaller scale. Like the impulsivity is there, but it's not like it's like I went on a big shopping spree versus like I lost my house, and
Yeah,
not and I laugh, not but I'm not laughing at the issue by any means because that's terrifying.
no,
Um, it's just like, yeah, that's a big difference. Also, bipolar does have like it's not just depression versus mania or hypomania.
yeah,
There can also be anger bursts. There's anger as well, um, which can be an ADHD thing as well, because you get like overstimulated and then you're like,
yeah.
So yeah,
I
yeah,
imagine it's
bipolar is
hard to
interesting.
separate the two. It's hard to separate the two for you, isn't it? I imagine because there's
Yeah,
similar overlapping.
yeah. I'm like, why am I ticked off? Is it the ADHD? Am I overstimulated, or is this the bipolar thing? Like, what's going on?
Yeah, yeah. It's difficult, isn't it? I mean, um, and the whole, like you said, the whole diagnosis process in general, in terms of mental health generally, is quite a long one, isn't it? Just to get a
Mm,
diagnosis of any form, um,
yes.
you know. Um, so in terms of the ADHD as well, I mean, just for the sake of listeners, we had a discussion, didn't we, a couple of weeks ago when we
Mm,
first sort of got you on board for the podcast and stuff, and
hmm.
you mentioned about hyperfocus, didn't you, particularly
Oh yeah.
like in relation to your ADHD and stuff, and how it's kind of also a positive quality. I think
It
it
can
was,
be.
yeah,
Yeah, I consider it, and I've heard this from some other ADHD folks too out there, where I kind of consider the ability to hyper focus as almost like a superpower.
yeah,
The only downside is that I can't just decide when to switch it on. It just happens, and I'm like, okay, the hyper focus is on. Time to do that thing that I've been putting off. You know, um, because like in one of my prior jobs, I worked with like admin support for a private label credit card group or
yeah,
team. And sometimes you would have like these massive spreadsheets of like transactions that got kicked out for some reason or needed to be manually posted or whatever. And it could be spreadsheets that are hundreds, maybe even like thousands of lines. Um, and stuff that's very tedious, very like you're going through something line by line. And it would be something that other people would kind of, like flinch away from, like, oh, I don't want to do that, and might be something that I would say, ooh, I'm going to procrastinate on that. But if it caught me, if you caught me at the time that the hyper focus was on, I was like, yeah, give me that spreadsheet. I got this. And I think I mentioned to you when we were chatting before, there have been times where like I received this task, say this spreadsheet, and I would start it at like 10 a.m. And then all of a sudden I look up and it's like 6 or 6:30 p.m. I haven't moved from my desk. I haven't gone to the restroom. I didn't do lunch, didn't do any breaks, didn't do like my little daily walks for my mental health. I
yeah,
haven't talked to anybody, haven't answered emails or IMs. And come to find out, some of those situations, like there had been people who had stopped by my cubicle to talk to me, ask me a question, whatever, and I had totally ignored them. Like I didn't even realize they were there. The
yeah,
only thing in my world, the only thing that existed was the task at hand. And I mean, it's just, you know, obviously it can be a negative because, those people might have thought I was being rude. especially like what if it's my boss? Like, oh, I'm being a jerk to my boss. She's gonna think, Um, but I got the thing done and I got it done quickly. Whereas everyone else, they have, their regular desk duties they're doing, and then they're kind of jumping into that spreadsheet between emails and between other tasks, and it might take them a lot longer. Where I'm just like powering through that sucker, and then my boss, every time something like that would happen, my boss would be like, "Holy crap! Like, how did you get this done?" I'm like, "I don't know. I'm just awesome." I don't want to tell them like, "Well, it's the chemical imbalance," because that'd be awkward.
Yeah, I mean, like it's interesting. You say like you lost track of time basically, and you were so engrossed in the task that you want people to stop by and you didn't sort of notice and stuff. And it sounds very similar to autism because I think it's a neurological condition, isn't it? ADHD,
Yeah.
so it's on the same sort of spectrum as that.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's really interesting, just the linkage really between the two there. But I know what you mean when you say that you don't want people to be offended or people to think, oh well, you was ignoring them, because I'm the same sometimes with tasks and stuff. I mean, I'm not sure. I don't know. I'm not sure what I would call it hyper focus in my case, but I do sort of get so engrossed with things that I lose track of time, and this podcast does that for me. I'm either editing or creating content for the podcast to go on the page, and before you know it, I look up and it's like 5 hours has gone by, and I'm just like, wow, like what have I done in 5 hours?
Yeah, and part of that is like I don't know if this is an autism trait as well, but for ADHD folks, we refer to it as time blindness, and that's also part of what leads to ADHD people as like being chronically tardy to everything. Like I've been fired from a job before because I was always late. Like I was always those like 6 minutes late or whatever that it took to like get counted. I'm like great at the job, but I got fired because I had too many points for tardy. So that time blindness comes into play with the hyper focus as well, because sitting there from 10 a.m. to 6 or 6:30, like holy crap. If I would have realized as the time was passing, like, oh, I should probably go eat, or maybe I do need to use the restroom.
Yeah. And just we're going slightly off topic actually, because you said about being fired and stuff. Like, do you know, in the States, is it at will firing? Is that what they call it? Where it's like,
Yeah, pretty much everywhere is at will as far as I'm aware. Like legally, if they can't say like I'm firing you because of your bipolar disorder. They can't say that. But if they fire you because of like a trait of your disorder, um if they don't like if they don't know, and especially if you don't know that it's part of a disorder, then there's no legal recourse. Now, if I had known at the time that this time blindness issue is due to a diagnosis, and they had it on file, because that's part of it too, legally speaking, in the States, as far as I know, they have to know. So if those two things had been true, then I could have had a case for appeal, either with like, internal tribunal type thing, or like a legal case for like an employment lawyer for them to fire me. But yeah, for me at the time, this was years ago, I didn't even know that I had ADHD. They didn't know I had ADHD, of course. But nowadays, if that were to happen, I'd be like, ho, ho, ho. Listen up, people. And plus, because in a job like that particular job it wasn't shift work. Um, I've been a senior manager myself in other jobs, and my personal idea about that stuff is if you like if you need to be on time because someone else can't leave until you get there, then I understand this focus on timeliness and tardiness and all that stuff. I get it. Because it is affecting someone else. When you're doing a job where you are the person who does it, and the work will sit on your desk until you get there, and you don't go home until that job is done today, why does it matter? Like, what is that 6 or 7 minutes going to do? Who cares? Like, I just don't get it. you know. And maybe that's me speaking from an ADHD mind. I don't know.
I think people are just a bit panicky, aren't they, and a bit sort of micromanagers and things like that. With time.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Yeah, especially big corporate companies. Like, sort of brought me to the last question now, which is, who's your idol and why?
There are a lot of really great people out there, a lot of wonderful historical figures that we can all model ourselves after, but I don't really have a particular idol. But like when I hear stories about or I see articles about um, acts of bravery. So, for example, I really admire anyone who does the right thing despite great personal risk. So, you hear about somebody who ran into a burning building to save a baby or something. And granted, like we don't recommend doing that. Especially if there are like professional firefighters there, let them do their job. But, you know, if you're going into a perilous situation to save others, um or an example would be like people who hid Jewish folks from the Nazis during World War II, knowing that they too would be in absolute grave danger if they were found out. You know, I admire that so much. And I think that's because I want to believe that were I in their shoes, I'd do the same thing. And I've been very lucky in life in that I haven't had to make those kinds of decisions. And most people never do. And I hope I never have to. But if I ever do, I would want to be aligned with my personal ethics, which would be to do the right thing no matter what.
Yeah, that's a really good good approach you've got, and it's good to have that moral compass and those ethics as well. Definitely,
Yeah.
Because there's so much sort of cruelty and evil in the world and bad things that happen. So it's good to hear that if you need to make that decision, you kind of will, or you'll kind of make that difference.
Yeah.
But, God forbid that any of us ever have to make that those sorts of decisions. But you never know, really. With what's going on over in Russia and things. Try not to be too political, but
yeah, I know what you mean.
Know.
I'm just I don't believe in individualism. I think that we are all in this together. And one of my mantras that I have said to so many people so many times is we rise by lifting others. Somebody somewhere has offered me a hand at some point in my life, whether it's career-wise, whether it's, mental health-wise, anything. And so I can do that. I can do that. We all can.
Pay it back, basically.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, that's amazing. That's a really good answer, to be honest. Because if you was to ask me that, I wouldn't be able to tell you who my idol was, to be honest.
Right. It's a hard question. You hit me with a hard ball there. I appreciate it.
Is there anything else that you'd like to add?
Not that I can think of. I mean, you did a pretty good job, like a pretty good, exhaustive, abstract list of what to talk about. I enjoyed it. Yeah.
Good. Hopefully you're not too tired and things from the
no.
high energy way in which I asked those questions. But yeah,
not at all. I can jack my jaw for a long time. I'm a girl. No, I'm kidding. I'm sure I'm not the only person in the world who loves to talk. That's I'm sure there are lots of men who love to talk too.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, it's been a real pleasure to have you on the podcast and answer the questions. You've given some good answers there, and I'm sure there's going to be some value in it for listeners and stuff.
Thank you.
And particularly talking about the bipolar as well, because I mean, obviously, I can't speak for me because I don't have bipolar, but I imagine it's really difficult to live with, and it's good to have your perspective on it and for you to put that out there on a podcast publicly as well. So thank you for that.
Sure.
Yeah. So we'll sort of bring it to a close really now. So that was Natalie Fields, who is you work in IT, right?
I do. I work in IT project management. Yeah.
Amazing. Yeah. So that was Natalie Fields, works within IT project management. and this is episode 7. We've been talking about bipolar and ADHD, and Natalie's sort of personal journey on the road to diagnosis and various other things. We've discussed some of the sort of symptoms and sort of challenges with diagnosis and those stigmas as well. More importantly, those stigmas and how other people sort of perpetuate those sort of negative aspects to these conditions and things. So that was episode 7, folks. Not sure what's in store for episode 8 yet. I won't be revealing that yet, but hopefully we'll have something in the pipeline very soon. So that's it, folks. You guys take care, and remember, we're not a medical podcast. So another just quick disclaimer there. Please speak to your doctor if you have any concerns, any medical concerns. So without further ado, guys, you guys all take care, and goodbye for now.
All right. Thanks, everybody. Thanks, Ashley.
You just listened to episode 7, guys. That was with Natalie Fields, a project manager from the United States. She was speaking up about bipolar disorder type 2 and ADHD. She bravely shared with us a sort of journey to getting a diagnosis of bipolar from a young age, in fact, and then she went on to get diagnosed with ADHD a bit later on. She also bravely shared with us the fact that she was hospitalised for mental health. Really brave of her to share that, really brave, and really appreciate the fact that she had the guts and the sort of courage to do that. Really courageous thing to do, and that's what we're all about on this podcast. We're about honesty and authenticity and putting your best foot forward and actually being honest and things like that. And without that honesty, we can't make progress. And really, I started this podcast to sort of bridge the gap between the general public and those that have first-hand experience of mental health and speak truth to ignorance, really, guys. So special thanks again to Natalie, and in fact, thank you to all our guests. Really appreciate every one of you that has come on and had the bravery to share your stories. Just as an aside, guys, I'd really appreciate if you could share with me your experiences of the process. I'm talking about guests here, by the way. I've got a form on the Facebook page in the pinned section. It's the guest, customer experience form. I want people to give me an honest view of the process from onboarding to recording and post-production, what you liked about it, what you didn't, and there's a chance for you to rate each section. I think it was about 8 questions or something like that, maybe less. It'll take you probably about 5-10 minutes. I'd really appreciate it if you could share your comments and your critique. It's anonymous as well, so don't worry about that. Similarly, if listeners, you could give me your honest views on the Facebook page. Maybe drop me a post on the Facebook page. Tell me what you liked, what you didn't like, and what you'd like to see in the future, more of, rather. So that's everything, folks, really. Please like, share, comment and subscribe across all our channels. That was episode 7, again with Natalie Fields, talking about bipolar and ADHD. So I look forward to having you on episode 8, guys. I won't give you any spoilers, but it's going to be an interesting one. So you guys take care then. Bye-bye for now.